We were left with a situation. We knew that we needed to have needle and syringe programs where clean, unused needles and syringes were given out and used needles and syringes were taken away, taken out of circulation. We knew that was critical, and we knew we had to have very high numbers of these distributed and collected. There was a lot of political resistance to that, as there always is for new harm reduction interventions that have anything to do with pleasure. And some people didn't like the idea that people who injected drugs were going to be exposed to less risk. It's hard to believe, but that was the situation. So we had to work very hard to try and get needle syringe programs established, and ultimately the authorities rejected many requests to introduce needle syringe programs, even as a pilot, and so we had to resort to civil disobedience to speed the whole thing up.
The first programs, NSP programs in Australia, were peer-driven, and they were underground, they weren't legal. And people like Alan Winchester, who sadly later died, need to be remembered on our World AIDS Day because of their passion and their commitment to protecting their community. It's on the back of pioneers such as Alan Winchester and Julie Bates that we have built a strong network of peer-based drug user organisations in Australia to protect our community against HIV and later on, of course, hepatitis C and hepatitis B.
Within about 2 years, the whole country was blanketed with needle syringe programs, and then over the following years, the needle syringe programs got better and better, and they were very pragmatic, they were compassionate, they were non-judgmental. Of course, there are always exceptions, but by and large, they were very good. And they not only disseminated clean injecting equipment and alcohol swabs and that sort of thing, but also very important education that the people who attended the needle syringe programs could believe. And they were also strong advocates for public health and for the human rights of people who inject drugs, and particularly education by people who inject drugs for other people who inject drugs. And this had to be use street language. University language got in the way, so it had to be explicit, street-based language, and it had to be about the practicalities of injecting drugs in a way that minimized the risk of HIV infection. And then the fourth important steps, along with the needle syringe programs, the drug treatment, the drug education, the fourth important step was forming organizations of people who inject drugs.
The reason that organizations which are peer-based are so effective is because we are present at that very time when transmission of blood-borne viruses like HIV is most prevalent, at the time of injecting. And therefore we can give information, resources and sterile equipment and advice to our peers when they are in the practice of injecting drugs. And there is no other person in society, unless you have done that behaviour, who understands the intricacies of it. And it's by this peer education and developing our community and empowering our community to look after their health and well-being, which has allowed us to keep the rate of HIV so low.
But harm reduction isn't an easy approach to advocate for. There's always a lot of resistance, especially if we're talking about a behaviour that is highly stigmatised, pleasurable. It's difficult. If you're advocating car seat belts or airbags or bicycle helmets or motorcycle helmets, there's no problem. Or vaccination for COVID is another harm reduction measure. That's a little bit difficult at the moment. Fortunately not too bad in Australia, but mostly harm reduction has an easy ride, but when it comes to drugs and sex, say condom promotion as well, it can be very difficult.
Some of the challenges involved over the last 30 years have been quite profound, and the big one across Australia and across the world is the stigma and discrimination that goes hand in hand with drug use. This is something which AIVL and its member organisations like CARMA fight daily, in particular around issues such as drug law reform and ensuring that our community can access equitable health outcomes, ensure that levels of blood-borne viruses are kept as low as humanly possible, and empowering our community to speak and to realise that they are human beings and that their lives are equally valuable as anyone else in society.
It's very important that harm reduction is fought for, the advocacy is successful and we win the debates, and that it becomes the mainstay of drug policy. We certainly haven't got there yet, but overall, although countries go through cycles of accepting or rejecting harm reduction, overall over time there's been a progressive trend towards acceptance of harm reduction. And in 2021, on April the 1st, as it so happened in the United States, the US government finally dropped its rejection of harm reduction and accepted harm reduction unambiguously in a statement from the White House. So that was very important. And we're seeing the idea of harm reduction generally spreading. We've now got more than 80 countries around the world have needle syringe programs. More than 80 countries now have methadone or buprenorphine substitution treatment for people who use heroin or other opiates, and condom promotion is widespread. So overall, harm reduction's had a difficult ride since it was first began developing as a response to HIV infection in the 1980s. We're in a better place now than we were 40 years ago, but it's the battle isn't over yet, and that's why organisations of people who use drugs and inject drugs are very important, because they'll continue to be important until harm reduction is really well established as the front and centre of drug policy. We're a long way from that, but let's hope we get there.
The fight against HIV isn't something that is over. AIVL and its network of peer-based organisations have a unique ability to connect with the cohort of people who use drugs who wouldn't access mainstream health services, for example. So our work in continuing the fight against HIV and other blood-borne viruses is not over, and AIVL and its network will continue in that fight.